pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Yo, 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 and welcome to our show. This is the Comic Booked Podcast. Yes, the Scorpion's Tale podcast is now the official podcast of comicbooked.com. I'm host Scorpio Moon, and hosting with me is Brad Brchman.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing this evening?
I know we jumped right into doing these rather quickly, without much introduction, but hopefully if you listened to our last podcast, you got to know us a little better, at least personally. This month we're going to focus on what to expect professionally. The field of entertainment journalism is ever growing, and I want to share with you why I think you should be making us your number one source for reviews. You can look at this as kind of Professional Review 101. I'm going to take you through my process, definitely giving away for free a lot of my secrets and tricks of the trade, but also think of this as a sort of contract. As a fan of reviews, there are certain things that I think an audience deserves, and as someone who composes them, there are certain promises I want to make. First one is an easy one, an obvious one. Spoilers.
Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers.
If you're going to discuss major points of something recent, put up a spoiler tag early on. If you blow it, you're going to have a hard time getting your audience to forgive you. But it's not just that. Remember, you're a professional here. If your review is spoiler-free, you signal that early and put your reader or listener at ease. And if you have spoilers, putting that tag up as advertisement. You're telling the spoiler hounds, hey, I've got what you're looking for.
Exactly. But personally, I've gotten to the point recently where, I used to be a huge spoiler hound. It's like I wanted to know everything that was going on. But it got to the point where, with the internet and the media the way it is today, there's just, everybody is spoiling everything. Every little tiny tidbit of information is being released on the internet. And I know that personally, when I read a review, or if I want to go read something about an upcoming project or something that just came out, I know I definitely don't want to sit there and start reading what's supposed to be just a basic review or just telling you how good it is, and then sit there and read some major plot twist and ruin the whole movie for me. Definitely an important thing in your reviews.
I think The Dark Knight Rises would probably be a fine example. If you went and spoiled the ending to The Dark Knight Rises, I think you'd pretty much just be shunned from all of comic book reviewdom pretty much forever.
Yeah, seriously. If somebody had told me that it's ending to Dark Knight Rises, they would have been defriended, blocked. there would have been some major hate against them.
Yeah, so forget about it. But, not every single plot point is a spoiler. Anything in the solicits or the premise, for example, I think you can pretty much consider that's just general knowledge. Something that's in the trailer, people know, something like Bane fights Batman is not really a spoiler for The Dark Knight Rises. But, once again, it's all about just letting them know one way or another, is it spoiler-filled or spoiler-free? Because like I said, sometimes I really want spoilers. A lot of times, a comic book or movie or something gets really hyped up. Some big thing like a death or some promise to change the game forever, and I don't necessarily want to read that book. I just want to know that one thing. I can't afford to buy everything in the world. I just want to know, so maybe I'm looking for it. Which takes us to recapping, which is totally optional, but I recommend that going in, you know how much you want to do. Will you include the synopsis, the premise, a full rundown of events? And you can structure this in whatever style you use. Heck, I've read whole reviews that are nothing but recapping the events that happened with no artistic discussion. And they serve their purpose. Like I said earlier, sometimes I just want to know what happened. And honestly, when I'm reviewing something, or honestly when I'm not reviewing something, I'm generally just watching it just for fun. I watch it pretty passively. So I might miss something, or sometimes the artwork in a book just doesn't convey the action well enough, or fine, I'll admit, some things just go way over my head or right past me, and I'm like, what the heck just happened there? And those are times that I go online, and I'm all fingers crossed hoping that I find one of those overly detailed descriptions out there somewhere. How much you recap will depend, of course, on what you decided about spoilers, but what happened and how it happened, or how it was presented, are different things. And that's the point that I really want to hammer home. Events have meaning, which you can discuss, But an example of what not to do is let your whole review become, I can't believe what just happened. What an outrage. Because that's not a review, it's a reaction. So at this point, okay, maybe you're thinking, okay, wise guy, if you're so smart, what is a review? And now we're getting to the good stuff. What you can expect from me, and what you should expect from a quality review, I believe, is objectivity. I know in art and entertainment it's mostly qualitative. Even something like a ranking or a grade that's given in numbers isn't actually weighed on a scale, but it's arrived at through thought. But you have to separate your opinions from your observations and evaluations. Now notice I said separate. There's room in your review for both, but there are different kinds of language for each, and we're going to get into that.
When you do actually decide to weight something on a scale, if you're going to give something 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, however you decide to judge it, kind of make sure there's a qualitative, a good reason behind it, and you give an explanation for that reason of why you gave it what you did. Don't just say, oh, I gave it 5 stars because this movie rocked. You don't want to do that. This movie is badass. I give it 5 stars. Yeah, a good review, if you are going to put it on a scale, have the scale in your head, what will deduct from 5 stars, what will add to it, and you will explain that to your audience. You won't just, you will give them a good reason of why you gave it what you gave it, and you will explain your reasoning. You won't just do it by gut reaction. When people read a review, they want to know, like, what's going on, what happened. They don't just want to know you liked it, you hated it. They want to know why you liked it, why you hated it.
So yeah, I'm trying to be consistent with your ratings too, have some idea in your mind, like what makes a 4-star versus a 5-star, like how many points is detract. You can't always see consistency across a whole site, but just for your personal reviews, try and have some kind of a line of thinking to it. And like I think you just brought up, maybe wait sometimes after you see or read something, because you might read it and just be like, oh man, that sucks so bad, I can't wait to tear it apart, or oh my god, I can't believe the movie was the best thing ever, I can't wait, 5 stars, oh my god. You might want to chill out and let that objectivity settle in, maybe sleep on it. Sometimes you want to get these things out quickly, and there isn't time, and that's okay too, but maybe just think about it a little. But thinking things like, well, if I like it, that makes it a good movie to me, that isn't going to cut it. That's fine for hanging out with your friends or on a message board, but if you're going to be a professional, you have to approach this like there is a truth about whether something is good or bad that you can get to if you do the work.
Yeah, even on sites like IMDb, everybody that likes it gives it 10 stars, 1 star. Don't do it. Just don't.
Yeah, that's a bad example. I like it, so it's 10 stars. I don't like it, so it's 1 star. That's not going to take you very far in the industry. And even with all that being said, good and bad are words that I rarely use in a review, especially not about a whole work, like to say, that's a good movie, or that's a bad movie. First of all, because when you say it, it sounds like you're summarizing the whole work, and that label applies to all of it. So if you say, what a bad movie, or that's a bad book, you're saying every aspect, like all of everybody's acting, or all of the art, pencils, inks, colors, letters, nothing has any redeeming value whatsoever. You need to be more specific. Even saying something like the acting is no good is just meaningless to me. Who's acting? In what ways? It's like solving an equation in math, if we can get a little nerdy here. You have to break it all the way down. That's the second reason I very sparingly use words like bad or good, because they're just so vague. You're not telling me anything when you use them, and with rare exceptions when I see them used, all the person is communicating is their opinion. And in just about the blandest, most base way possible. So don't do that. Don't sum up a work unless you just presented a detailed, exhaustive review.
And for one example, I'm going to use Twilight. And I know this may irritate Scorpio, but...
Oh no. Oh god.
No, I'm not going to bash it. Not totally. Now, one great example is when it comes to Twilight, a lot of people that do not like the movie or do not like the books, they say that Kristen Stewart's acting is just bad. It's like, oh, she's a bad actress. However, what they never say, or very rarely say, is why they think she was bad. A lot of the good ones, a lot of the better bad reviewers say, The way she, doesn't close her mouth when she talks. Just the way she just kind of has a flat emotional state. But one thing that people do not take into account is the character is based on a book. Now, whether you like the book or hate the book, it doesn't matter. But the thing is that, in my opinion, while she may be flat through some of her acting and some of her scenes, the way the character was written was kind of, I don't want to say bad, but the way the character was written in the book was very similar to how Kristen actually acted it out. She was actually doing a fairly decent job when it came to portraying the character as it was written.
Sure, as was written, or say as she was directed to. And that's one more thing about being specific. Exactly,
yeah. When it comes to acting, you got to keep in mind that actors and actresses, most often, a director makes the decision. No matter, they get told how to act, what emotions to show, how to read a line, how to walk, where to walk. So even in the case of a bad actor or bad actress, it may not be the acting, it may be the directing. The actresses and actors may have done the best job with the information they were given. And that's kind of one detail you gotta look at throughout the whole work.
Yeah, you can't blame someone for doing what they were told to do. And this is not to say that every review has to be a 10-page research paper thesis, or that they even should. I generally write probably shorter reviews, somewhere around the 500-word mark. And I guess this is a personal style, but what I like to see is the highlights. Pick out some of the particular strengths and weaknesses and focus on them. What makes what you're reviewing unique? Describe its personality. Still on the point of objectivity and how you achieve it, one of the free tips I'll give you is this. Try to focus on the qualities, not the quality. This is not to say don't critique. They call us critics for a reason, and I'll come back to that. But if you're focusing on the qualities, you'll do your audience a better service, I think, by giving them a more vivid sense of the work you're discussing, and it keeps you more specific and factual. Talk about the kind of story. Is it a mystery, romance, horror? What different genre elements does it embrace? Does the colorist lean towards certain spectrums or shades? Is the art more lifelike or surrealistic? Is a normally absurd actor more subdued? Story, dialogue, art, acting, special effects, scenery, music, wardrobe, lighting, and this list is not even comprehensive. Describe as many parts as you think necessary, and sure, how they work as a whole, but send the right kudos and faults to where they belong in your estimation, and be specific.
Which elements you decide to rate and give your opinion on quite often also depends on what genre movie it is. For example, you're not gonna, on a romantic comedy, you might want to focus on, you'll focus on the acting, the dialogue, the scenery, the music, and kind of that side of things. You're not going to necessarily worry about special effects, or you may not have special effects to worry about. But when it comes to reviewing a comic book movie, the special effects are a big part of that genre. So you definitely want to hit upon things that are essential to each genre, or whichever genre you're actually reviewing at the time. Don't just use the same basis of critique against all genres. You have to be specific and make sure what you are reviewing applies to what you are reviewing.
I think that also has a bit to do with keeping your target audience in mind, your audience for your work. I also want to say, I love how we kept using Twilight as our example for some of these. I promise you, when we went into this, I did not plan on using Twilight for all my examples, but it's actually kind of funny how well that works for some of these, and we're actually gonna touch on that again later. I think there actually was one point where I did plan on mentioning it. But moving on, if you don't know something, don't talk about it. If you don't have the vocabulary to review the score of a film, then don't. If you don't know what the key grip does, don't go calling them out. But being descriptive is how you learn. Maybe you don't know anything about how comic books are lettered, but by describing the letters and what they look like, or your impressions of them, you can evaluate the aspects and slowly start to recognize them, or at least make yourself a note to learn more about them later, and you can grow as a reviewer. So once again here, you're describing the qualities, and you can tell your audience a lot more about the comic, movie, novel, etc., but apply the same lesson about being specific to your critiques. Don't call the artwork awful, and don't just say the colors and the pencils are bad and think you were being detailed. Okay, for example, something like, Wolverine's claws are depicted comically long and can never retract fully into his arms, is critical of a particular piece of artwork in a factual way that, you couldn't really argue with in that specific piece. I think I'm using Wolverine and Witchblade, the one crossover cover, as an example here, but I know that's happened more than once. Maybe someone thinks that looks cool, and, that's their opinion, your opinion, whatever, but all you did was kind of describe it and put it out there in a specific way, and maybe lots of people agree. By all means, include your opinions, but state them as such. Phrases such as I like or I don't like are fine. Just as an aside, I don't want to risk veering into a territory where people think my opinion is that reviews need to be stuffy or formal. But saying something bored you versus outright calling something boring, there's a marked difference there, because when you state opinions as fact, you damage your own journalistic integrity. I don't want people to get the wrong impression here. I don't want this to come across as me sounding off because someone spoke badly about something I liked, because I'm really turned off by overly positive reviews too. When I read or hear something like, it was epic, brilliant, excellent, a masterpiece, once again, all you're really doing there is communicating an opinion. So you liked it, cool. Go ahead and be passionate, but don't lose your objectivity completely, and don't just throw positive adjectives at it because you liked it.
Keep in mind that your audience, you're not sitting here chatting with your buddies and your friends. You're chatting as a professional to an audience that expects to be reading a professional review. Scorpio and I, when we sit there and talk about Batman, we were sitting there going back and forth, oh, it's epic, it was awesome. But between the two of us, we are friends. We knew what we were talking about. We knew what we were basing our opinions on. But when you're sitting there talking to an audience who doesn't know you, who doesn't know what you like, what you don't, they don't have any clue what epic means to you. All they know is, it's epic, good. So, was it good or bad? What happened? You need to be descriptive and let them know what you think is epic, why you think it's epic.
Epic and brilliant, of course, I think are probably two of the most overused words in the reviewers' vocabulary nowadays. Just wanted to point that out. Okay, now this next part is especially for when you're reviewing something with source material. Comic book movies are an obvious one, so I'll probably use mostly movie examples here, but nowadays almost everything seems to be based on something. There are two schools of thought I generally encounter. One, that a work should be reviewed solely on its own merits, and two, that you have to take into account its source. And they're both wrong. The piece you're reviewing does deserve to be reviewed on how it stands or on its own, but a huge chunk of your audience is going to be invested in the strength of the adaptation. The key, again, is that specific and separate language for each. You certainly can't limit your review to just the translation. A line like, this movie sucks, it's nothing like the comics, will never fly. If that's all you want to talk about in your article, then fine. You just have to phrase everything to specify that that's all you're reviewing, or that all you're reviewing is the honesty to its source, or to reverse that, just tell your audience, hey, I'm not well versed enough in this material. Of course, this is where research can come in, but hey, it's your review. It would also be helpful to keep in mind our different perspectives. Your expectations for how a character should act might not be the same as someone who grew up with or prefers a different era. You shouldn't be expected to account for everyone, so this is why you're going to be specific. Something like, I think only Adam West fans will enjoy this take on Batman and Robin is a fine example. There are also at least two ways to do this. You can look at specific events, names, costume colors, timelines, and such, and compare and contrast the differences and similarities, or what's usually more important, to me at least, how well something conveys the same meanings. How well does it get to the heart of what the original story is about? How well does it get to what's at the heart of a character? Both ways of looking at it are valid, it just depends on what you care about. If your movie or comic doesn't have a direct source, think about its heritage. How has this type of story evolved? It probably does all go back to something. Or evaluate how it holds up within the genre. For example, if you want to review Star Trek, the Star Trek movie, evaluate it on its own, the writing, acting, sets, etc. And that is probably the more important thing, I will give you that. Then if you want to take a look at how it will hold up for fans of the show, or the evolution of the franchise, you can comment on how well it functions as a sci-fi film as well. Of course, also keep in mind what it tried to do. For example, the makers of the last Ghost Rider film took their inspiration from the image of the character, but freely admitted it was never their goal, really, to bring any specific books to the big screen. There are still a lot of pluses and minuses in its strength of the translation. I mean, there's room to compare, but watch their specific language. You can't say they did a poor job adapting Ghost Rider because they never tried to. If you want to fault them for their intentions, you can surely include that in your review. Just make sure you're communicating the correct thing. This is also where I wanted to mention Twilight again. Keep in mind what it tried to do. I hear so much Twilight hate, and actually Twilight hate is kind of one of my pet peeves, just because it often just seems so reactive and ill-informed. But I hear this Twilight hate, like, oh my god, Twilight is the death of vampires, and Twilight is ending horror. It's the worst vampire horror thing ever. But they never set out to really make a horror movie. Twilight is a teen love drama romance movie kind of thing with a supernatural twist. I mean, that's all it really is. So you can't say it sucks as a horror movie, or these are the worst vampires ever, because that was just never something that they tried to do.
Yes, it's basically like a show on the CW. I mean, the first thing that's important to them is the drama, the love triangles. Even on their superhero shows, and most of them, the drama comes first, the superhero stuff comes second. But they specifically have let that be known. They don't sit there and try to hide the fact, oh, this is a superhero show and it's going to be all kinds of powers and it's going to be all straight out of the comic book. No, they let you know this is an adaptation and should be viewed as such. This isn't this isn't the Avengers. This is Batman, for example. I mean, if you take the Avengers and Batman, Avengers was a straight out of the comic adaptation. It was supposed to be faithful and close to the source material, whereas Batman was never supposed to be the Batman from the comics. The whole intention was to bring him into our world and tell a different side of the character, focus on different aspects of the character. And as such, if reviewing those different items I mentioned, you need to keep in mind the context of which it's intended and which parts of the story they're trying to focus on more than others, and how they're trying to portray the story.
Avengers versus Batman, bringing up the fan wars again. Actually, I think that's a really interesting one to use, because I always thought what they were trying to do with the Avengers, the way I saw it, is the Avengers was like really strictly like a Marvel-produced production. I mean, I really did think that you can see a lot of similarities directly between Avengers, the movie, and Avengers, the first issue of the comic book. But I mean, still the whole idea is like, this is a Marvel production, this is like officially endorsed, this is another expression of the Avengers material. Whereas Batman, I mean, the whole WB-DC thing is a little more wonky, and what I think they did with, the Nolanverse, for example, the latest Batman franchise, was they were very much more trying to make a movie out of Batman versus make a Batman movie, if you catch my drift.
And I'll kind of give everyone a hint that's listening. Let's say that you're watching or reviewing a movie, but the movie is different from whatever source material it's based on. However, maybe this is a smaller movie, maybe this isn't some huge blockbuster movie, and the studio never specifically came out and said what their intentions were, what they were trying to put across. So all you're doing is saying, okay, well, I read this book, I saw this movie, it sucked. The movie sucked, it wasn't like the book. Well, kind of one way you can kind of try to figure out what their intention was, before you go judging them, find out who the director is. Now, with Avengers, it was Joss Whedon. Many people know Joss Whedon is a huge comic book fan. He's a huge geek, huge into the genre. So when they chose him as a director and his movie came out, it's clear from that choice that the movie was intended to be a comic book on screen. You switch over back to Batman, you take Nolan. Now, Christopher Nolan always does these kind of darker movies, these mind twisters. I mean, he's never been a big comic fan. He's not a huge geek or comic reader. So even if you didn't know that Batman wasn't supposed to be a comic book on screen, a straight adaptation, you can kind of get what the general focus of the movie, what the general intent of the movie is, just based on the fact they chose Nolan to direct it. You can kind of tell the tone they're going for on that one fact alone.
Alright, what I want you to get from this segment, a project's quality depends on its own merits, but only up to a point, and no matter how you choose to dissect it, the important thing is to be descriptive and clear in your purpose. Now, once you're finished and you're published, engage your audience afterwards, but not in flame wars. So you've spent a lot of time on your review, and now you're hoping for some comments. You want to interact with your audience, which is great. It can be really rewarding. But please, have the presence of mind to realize when someone is just trying to get you riled up. We won't let people get away with something really revolting. Like we won't let people say really revolting things, but that's what moderation is for. That's why we moderate comments when we can. Don't just go to war with people, because it just makes us all look bad and reinforces some really negative stereotypes about the industry and comic book fans in general.
Keep in mind, your purpose is to be professional. When you're on a professional site, when you're doing a professional review, you're speaking from a professional point of view, which means that you do not want to get involved when it comes to infighting, flame wars. Your goal should be to keep in mind and try to make everyone else realize that different people view this in different ways. So just because they don't like something, or one person doesn't like something for one reason, doesn't mean another person can't like it for that same reason. They had a different expectation. Theirs was met, the first person's wasn't. Your goal is to try to make sure that you keep that in mind and make sure everybody knows that. I mean, there's no reason to get in a fight over a movie just because you like it and someone else doesn't. It's just a waste of time, it's stupid, and it's immature.
So in closing, the reason I started doing all of this was to create the kind of content I want to see. That's why I'm writing, that's why I'm podcasting. That's really my biggest motivation. For me, it's all about living up to a standard. And I'm sharing my ideals because I'm hoping they spread and I can see even more like this out there. So, that's all for this edition of the Comic Book Podcast. Class dismissed.
Hey man, this is Kevin Smith, and you've been comic booked, which means they're going to ask you to buy 2 seats to be at this website. It's really humiliating. But you know what? You'll get over it and be a stronger person for it. It'll just bug you once a year. You'll cry a lot. Comic book.